We get to start a new series today. In this series, I'm pretty excited about because it kind of helps walk us through maybe this moment where we were separate. You know, some stories, they are stories that start with like a clean page. But other stories, they just don't. It's like they started in darkness. They started with loss. They started with this feeling of what used to be, of what might have been. And so the series that we're beginning today, this is a series for anyone who has ever said, I didn't think it would be like this. Because that's how the book of Ruth begins. And that's where most of us will kind of chart back. This is where life got real for me. So whether you're a student staring at anxiety instead of a future, you're just so unsure of what's next in your life. Or you're a couple that's holding disappointment when you wanted to be holding a newborn. Or someone who has retired wondering if your best days are behind you. I want you to know that you are not alone in the tension. Because Ruth is not a book about fast miracles. It's about God's quiet restoration. So this series is called Restored, a journey from loss to legacy. And what is the very first step of that journey? It's this: admitting when life feels like famine. You know, that's not easy. It's not easy because famine, it means lack. Famine means loss. And it means not only I don't have what I hoped for, it's saying, listen, I don't know. I don't know if I can keep hoping at all. But famine shows up differently in each season of life. Shows up on the teenager who scrolls and smiles on the outside. And they're just scrolling through everybody else's highlight reel. And they're just trying to put their best smile out there. Shows up in the married couple who's still sharing a bed, but they're no longer sharing dreams. It's in the business owner who's working harder than ever, but things still continue to slip through their fingers. It's in the retiree wondering, is this all there is now? Are my best years behind me? See, famine, it strips things down. It quiets the noise, and it produces a silence. And in that silence, we are forced to make a decision. And that's where we meet Elimelech. Now, when I was getting ready for this, not only is Elimelech hard to say, then I started going, Elimelech, Elimelech. And there we are, we're in Lion King or whatever, whoever else sang that, right? And we're just transported to there, and it just got stuck in my mind, so I thought I'd share it with you. Sorry. Now every time you're going to read it, you're going to Elimelech, Elimelech. But Elimelech, this guy, he's a dad, he's a husband, he's a provider. He's all of those things with an empty pantry. And he feels pressure just like many of us. And Elimelech, he does what he feels is reasonable. He moves his family from Bethlehem, the house of bread, into Moab. And everything about it makes sense on paper. So let's look in Ruth chapter 1, verse 1. In the days when the judges ruled in Israel, a severe famine came upon the land. So let's start in that. Bethlehem literally means house of bread. And the house of bread has nothing in it. The pantry is bare. There's no bread in the bakery. There's no justice in the street. There's no king in the land. That's what the book of Judges says in Judges 21:25. In those days, Israel had no king. In those days, Israel had no king. All the people did whatever seemed right in their own eyes. No king. People doing whatever in the world they want, whatever they think of, whatever they believe is right for them. Can we be honest? I think that sounds a whole lot like today. People trusting their feelings instead of truth. People choosing comfort over godly character. Chasing survival instead of surrender. And this is the context that Elimelech lived in. And so he makes a decision. There was no one leading the people of God. There was no one telling them, this is the way that God would have you go. And when faith feels optional, fear takes over. Security. Our security no longer comes from God if fear's taken over, and our security feels like it comes from the things that we can hold, from the things that we can eat, from our provision. Verse 1 continues, so a man from Bethlehem in Judah, left his home and went into the country of Moab, taking his wife and 2 sons with him. And I want to pause here because this is it's about more than geography. It's explaining a very crucial crossroads. Bethlehem literally means house of bread. It was the ancestral home of God's people. It was a place of promise. It was a place where God had proven himself to be faithful. But there's a famine. There's no bread in the house of bread. And when your stomach growls, so does fear. So Elimelech, husband, father, a man whose name means, my God is king. He does what so many of us do when life gets lean. He doesn't pray. He doesn't gather his community around him. He doesn't consult a prophet. What does he do? He leaves. He packs up his stuff and walks away from Bethlehem, the house of bread, and he leads his family to Moab. Now, Moab is not just another town. It's not that. To the original audience, Moab would have set off so many spiritual alarm bells, it's crazy. Because Moab was the land that was born out of Lot's incest with his daughter. That's Genesis 19. It became home to Shemash worship. That's where children were sacrificed on burning altars, 2 Kings chapter 3. God had explicitly commanded his people to not associate with the Moabites, Deuteronomy 23. So this wasn't a relocation, this was resignation. Elimelech quit trusting the God he had claimed as king. This was not a simple move across the river. This was a departure from covenant identity. And it started so small. It was like a whispered rationale. He says, listen, I'm just trying to protect my family. It's only temporary. Bethlehem's not working. Maybe Moab is better than nothing. But make no mistake, when fear leads, faith is always the casualty. fear invites us to leave where God has placed us, to chase what looks easier. But it always costs more than we think. When we begin to chase the things that look easy, quick money, all of those things, it always costs you well more than you think it will. And who paid the price for Elimelech's move? In short, everyone. Elimelech, he dies in Moab. His sons, they marry Moabite women, and then they die too. His wife, Naomi, is left with 3 tombstones and 2 daughters-in-law. The man who left to avoid famine led his family into a funeral. Because that's what fear-driven faithlessness does. It promises safety, but it delivers sorrow. It dresses itself up in logic. It makes sense on paper, right? But it leads us outside of God's will. It trades long-term legacy for short-term relief. Maybe I should ask it this way. Have you ever walked away from the place that God has planted you simply because it felt dry for a while? You ever just kind of step back and go, you know what, I'm just not feeling it? Maybe it came out this way, that you left a church, you left a friendship, you left a calling, not because God had released you. He didn't say, listen, you've done all your work there, it's time for you to go. But because fear whispered, it's too hard. So you chose a shortcut. You chose a shortcut financially. Took on more debt than you could ever afford. You chose a shortcut relationally. You just settled. You chose a shortcut sexually. Because being faithful, there was nothing in it for you. Elimelech's story is our story more than we would like to admit. But we don't always pack up and move to Moab. We don't literally just pack up and move. But emotionally, do we find ourselves just kind of backing up and moving away from our relationships, moving away from our being with God spiritually? Do we find ourselves packing up and saying, you know what, that was good for a moment, but there are greener pastures over here? When the path that we go on looks like there's always something better one step further, that's the path that Elimelech was on. The man whose name meant, my God is king. And that should have anchored his identity. But in a moment of fear, his belief that my God is king was tested. And this test of kingship, it's not in the midst of calm. It's in the midst of crisis. And that's why when we read God's word, we find solace in things like Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5, that says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and do not depend on your own understanding. Trust in the Lord with everything you have, but don't let your mind take it away. And that's the crossroads that Elimelech faced. Was he going to lean on God's promises, trust in God's provision, or follow the plan that he had sketched out on paper? Because he made the decision that felt logical. But it turned out to be the one that wrecked his legacy. Verse 3. Then Elimelech died, And Naomi was left with her 2 sons. Now the 2 sons married Moabite women. One married a woman named Orpah, and the other a woman named Ruth. But about 10 years later, both Mahlon and Chilion died. This left Naomi alone without her 2 sons or her husband. Naomi followed her husband to this land, and now she has lost every bit of her future. Moab gave them a short-term provision, but it cost a long-term promise. It was a quick fix. Food in famine. Opportunity when everything else looks like loss. Movement when everything feels like it's stuck. But she found out what we probably already know, that Moab always has a price. Yes, it may feed your hunger for a moment, but it starves your soul. It offers relief, not redemption. Moab says things like this. It says, just do what you have to do right now. Bethlehem says, wait. Wait and trust that God is working even when it feels like He is not. See, Moab solves your symptoms. It solves that immediate ache. But Bethlehem, it addresses the very source. Moab makes you feel better for today. But Bethlehem is where the long story of restoration is written. Elimelech chose Moab because it looked like survival. It looked like the very place that they would be able to just weather a storm. But instead, he left the very place that would rebuild their legacy. See, Moab gives what you want in the moment, but it makes you miss what God wants for your future. It's the job. That job that pays extremely well, but it keeps you away from your family. It's the relationship that feels comforting, but it pulls you away from godly convictions. It's choosing to escape pain when life feels heavy. And that escape you chose leaves your life emptier than it was before. Don't trade eternal fruit for temporary relief. If you plant your life in Moab, you might survive the famine, but you may miss the harvest. I mean, you chased a job, but you lost your spiritual grounding. You chose a relationship that pulled you out of godly community. You wanted relief, and you wound up with a huge pile of regret. And this is the place, this is where Naomi finds herself. All of these choices, all of this moment, it led to this place where in verse 20 she says, "Don't call me Naomi. Instead, call me Mara, for the Almighty has made life very bitter for me." Naomi, she names her reality. And maybe some of you need to name yours too, because Naomi, the name means pleasant. She says, don't call me pleasant, call me bitter. Don't call me that name anymore because it's no longer the reality. That name, it does not fit me anymore. Because Naomi, she's worn out. She's empty. She's grieving. She's bitter. And she looks at her life and she says, call me Mara. Call me bitter. And it fits. This is the woman that's buried her husband. She stood over the graves of both of her sons. She had left Bethlehem full of dreams. And she came back carrying only disappointment. You can hear it in the words. The Almighty has made my life bitter. She's not blaming the economy. She's not pointing fingers at the Moabites. She's putting this at the feet of God. And I wonder, are you there? You've been through so much. You've been through so much that the old labels, they just don't fit anymore. People call you strong, but you don't feel strong. You feel weak. People think of you as steady, but you've been shaken. You used to be called faithful. But now, you feel forgotten. And somewhere deep inside, you've wondered, God, why would you let this happen? And that's what's powerful about Naomi. She tells the truth. Naomi, she doesn't sugarcoat it. She doesn't pretend that it's okay. She doesn't say, fake it till you make it. She walks into town and she says, this is who I am. I'm not pleasant. I'm bitter. And we often think that naming bitterness is weakness. But here, it is actually a turning point. Because God cannot heal what you pretend isn't broken. Restoration starts where honesty begins. See, Naomi, she didn't know it yet, but the very moment she names her bitterness, God was already working through Ruth, who was walking beside her. Naomi, she felt abandoned, but she wasn't truly alone. She felt forgotten, but redemption, it was already walking with her. And this is the story of Jesus on the cross. Jesus, he meets us at our worst. He takes on our pain. He died in our place. And he doesn't need our performance. He doesn't need us saying things that aren't true. He needs our honesty. Because restoration always begins with surrender. And when we surrender to God, there's still movement happening. But for us to see that, we need to rewind a few verses. So let's go back to verse 6. Then Naomi heard in Moab that the Lord had blessed his people in Judah by giving them good crops again. So the place that they had left finally has good crops again. She heard the rumor. So Naomi and her daughters-in-law, they get ready to leave Moab and return to her homeland. So something stirred in Naomi when she heard. She heard that there was bread again in the house of bread. And something stirred in her, and so she takes the first step. And along the way, she comes to her senses, and she releases her daughters-in-law from going with her. They don't have to go back to her home. they can stay in theirs. She says, listen, girls, I've got nothing for you. I've got absolutely nothing for you. I don't have a husband, and I can't give you any husbands. I can't grow any sons. I can't give you a life. I have nothing. The only thing I have is bitterness. And my bitterness doesn't have to be yours. Orpah hears this. She says, you made some good points here. So she decides to leave Naomi and go back to her family in Moab. In seeing this, Naomi, she says, Ruth, do the same. Go back. Find a husband. Be cared for by your family. And then Ruth declares, verse 16. Ruth replied, don't ask me to leave you. Don't ask me to turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. And this is likely one of the most powerful faith statements in the scriptures. It's about loyalty. It's about full surrender. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. In that, Ruth says, listen, I am leaving behind my gods. I'm leaving behind my culture. I'm leaving behind everything that I cling to for security. I'm walking away from my family identity. And she follows Naomi into the unknown, turning from one path and walking toward the Lord. This is what faithfulness looks like. Turning to the Lord even when you don't know where the road is going to take you. Ruth committed to Naomi. She committed to a new way of life, to a new story, to a new God, and this is where we begin to see our story in hers. Because you've likely been at the same kind of crossroads that Naomi was at. You've experienced loss. You've tasted bitterness. You're wondering what's next. Ruth is sitting in that same spot. She could go back to what's familiar. She could go back to Moab and be with her family, go back to the old rhythms of life, go back to safety. Or she could take the harder road of faithful surrender. I mean, you could say things like, I don't know what the future holds, but I'm not turning back. We could chime in and say, even if life is uncertain, I'm trusting God. I'm trusting the God who leads. I'm not following in comfort. I'm following the one who can restore. So Ruth, she doesn't wait for the plan to be clear. She doesn't wait until Naomi says, hey, this is what's waiting for us when we get back there. She leaned into loyalty. She leaned into covenant love, and she walked with Naomi. So Ruth had a moment, a decision, a time that she needed to make a plan. She needed to decide what she's going to do. Maybe you have a Ruth moment. Maybe as a student or young adult, you just need to know this. You don't have to wait until you are older to follow God. Because here's really what's true. You don't know what's next. You don't know college, career, relationships. But when your future feels unclear, your faithfulness now, it shapes your legacy later. You may be having that Ruth crossroads moment as a single or a young professional where you just need to know this. Be careful where you choose to feed your soul. Choose Bethlehem over Moab. Because the world, it provides quick, attractive, and me-focused opportunities. But life built in Bethlehem is step by faithful step. There are easier roads that look more comfortable, but you're invited to walk in faithfulness, not inconvenience. You're invited to commit to people, commit to purpose, commit to calling, even when the road is unknown, it's uncharted. Maybe your Ruth crossroads moment as a married couple, maybe it means choosing each other again, even when the path is hard. Faithfulness isn't always glamorous. Faithfulness is staying. Faithfulness is choosing the other. Faithfulness is walking forward together in trust. Maybe your crossroad moment as a parent is you need to recognize that your faith, you model it for your kids, not just by your words, but by how you follow Jesus when life is hard. What would it look like for your family? What would it look like if you said, we're a family who walks with God no matter what? Maybe you're kind of in that crossroads moment now as an empty nester or retiree. Your most faithful step might still be ahead. See, Ruth, she could have faded into the background. She could have gone back home. But her faith is etched in history. Don't underestimate what God can do through your yes. The legacy you leave is shaped more by where you choose to stay than what you try to escape. Ruth, you know what happened to her? She became the great-grandmother of King David. She became that because she chose to walk with Naomi when Naomi turned back to the Lord. Maybe the Ruth moment for everyone in here is just this: the invitation to believe in God and walk with Him. Even in uncertainty, even in loss, even when it costs you something, because faithfulness is the soil where legacy grows. So, verse 22. So Naomi returned from Moab, walking back into Bethlehem, accompanied by her daughter-in-law, Ruth. They arrived in late spring, at the beginning of the barley harvest. Now, this is a setup. They arrived just at the right time. God brought them back at the perfect time. God does not rush. God does not get anxious. So maybe you need to hear this. God's delays aren't denials. He's aligning the timing for your restoration. Has God told you it's time to return? Has God told you that it's time for you to make a change? To come back from something that you thought was temporary? What do you need to walk away from? Don't make your temporary detour your lifelong identity. Some of us need to walk back to the place that God has called us. Some of us need to step back into the practice of prayer, back into the fellowship of His people, to be a student of His Word. Even though you can't see God's hand, it does not mean he's not writing your story. If you are resonating in Ruth 1, if you feel stuck, if you feel dry, you feel bitter, you feel the loss, don't let your identity get buried in a broken season. What if restoration doesn't start when you feel strong, but when you take one faithful step back toward Bethlehem? Let's pray.